My husband called me, I'm divorcing you, and I've already sold the house, but then I fought back. Imagine this. You're sitting at home, going through your normal routine, when you get a call. Your husband says, I'm divorcing you, and I've already sold the house. How would you react? This is exactly what happened to me, and trust me, it's not what you think. What I did next, well, it changed everything. Stick around, and I'll tell you how I turned the tables on a man who thought he could control me forever. I sat in the conference room, the hum of voices around me blending into meaningless noise. The overhead lights cast a cold, sterile glow on the long mahogany table, and I could see my own reflection in the sleek surface, calm, composed, unreadable. But inside, my mind was restless, tangled in the unease that had been gnawing at me for months. Something was wrong. I had felt it in the way David, my husband, had grown distant, the way his late nights at work had become more frequent, his phone never out of arm's reach, his touch colder than ever. I had ignored it, pushed the thoughts away, telling myself that maybe this was just a rough patch. But deep down, I knew. I had known for a long time. My phone vibrated on the table, breaking through my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. David. My stomach clenched, an instinctive reaction I couldn't suppress. I hesitated before picking it up, swallowing the tightness in my throat as I excused myself from the meeting. I walked out into the hallway, my heels clicking against the polished floor, my breath already coming faster. This was it. I could feel it. Hey, I answered, trying to sound normal, trying to pretend that this was just another call, that I wasn't bracing for impact. His voice came through the speaker, calm, too calm. I'm divorcing you. For a second, I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and cold like a blade pressed against my skin. My fingers tightened around the phone, and I forced myself to speak. What? His sigh was almost bored, like he was reciting a grocery list. I've already filed the papers, and I sold the house. A rush of cold spread through me, my vision blurring at the edges. You what? I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. The house? He repeated, slower this time, like I was too stupid to understand. It's sold. You'll need to figure out where you're going to live. I suggest you start packing. My knees felt weak, and I reached for the wall to steady myself. I had expected something, maybe a fight, maybe even a dramatic confrontation. But this? He had sold our home without even telling me? The place where we had built our life together, where we had spent holidays, hosted friends, made plans for a future he had apparently decided to erase? And he was telling me like it was nothing? You can't sell the house without my signature, I said, forcing steel into my voice. He chuckled. That's cute, Amelia. But you're wrong, it's already done. I pressed my hand against my stomach, trying to contain the nausea rising in my throat. I had lived with this man for years. I had trusted him. And now, with a single phone call, he had shattered everything. Then he delivered the final blow. Nicole and I need the money to start our life together, he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She deserves better than a place like that anyway. Nicole. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected, of course. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the change in his cologne, the way he had started showering the moment he got home. But hearing it? Hearing him admit it so effortlessly, without an ounce of guilt? My fingers tightened around the phone, nails digging into my palm so hard it hurt. But I refused to let him hear it. I would not give him the satisfaction of knowing he had broken me. Sounds good, I said, my voice flat, cold. Enjoy your new life, David. I hung up before he could respond. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood in the hallway, staring at the floor, the weight of it all pressing down on me. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was real. This wasn't some nightmare I could wake up from. David had blindsided me. He had ripped away the foundation of everything I thought I knew, and he had done it with a smirk in his voice. I could feel the tears burning behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wasn't going to cry. Not here, not over him. Instead, a different feeling crept in, pushing through the shock, replacing the grief. Rage. David thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything from me. He thought he could just erase me from his life like I was nothing. But what he didn't know, what he never bothered to check, was that the house, the one he thought he had sold, was in my name. A slow, bitter smile tugged at the corner of my lips. He has no idea what's coming for him. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went back to the meeting, nodded when I was supposed to, even managed a few polite smiles. But my mind was elsewhere. By the time I made it to my hotel room that night, the shock had worn off, replaced by something sharp, something focused. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was war. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person who could help me burn David's world to the ground. She picked up on the first ring. "Chloe," I said, my voice steady, my decision already made. "I need your help." There was a pause, then her voice, low and sure. "Tell me everything." And so I did. Every word, every detail, every calculated move David had made to try and destroy me. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. Then Chloe exhaled, a sound that was half amusement, half something darker. "Oh, he really screwed up," she said. "He has no idea what's coming." I sat back, gripping the phone, feeling the first taste of control return. "No," I agreed, my lips curling into a slow smile. "He really doesn't." Because David had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. The moment I hung up the phone, I stood frozen in place, my mind racing, my body trembling with adrenaline. The weight of David's words still hung in the air, poisoning every rational thought I tried to grasp. He had blindsided me, ripped the rug right out from under me, and for what? To run off with Nicole? To erase our entire life together, like it was nothing more than an unfortunate mistake? He had sold our home, the place we had built together, the place where we had once dreamed of a future, and he had done it without me, as if I didn't matter, as if I was just some old furniture he could toss aside. For a few minutes, I just stood there in the empty hotel room, staring blankly at the carpet, feeling the emotions war inside me, shock, betrayal, grief, and then something else, something sharper, rage. It burned through me like a slow, controlled fire, feeding on every lie, every manipulation, every cold dismissal he had ever thrown my way. And then, just like that, the fear, the devastation, the disbelief, it all melted away. What was left in its place was clarity. I grabbed my phone again and dialed Chloe's number. She picked up on the first ring. "Tell me everything." And I did. Every word, every smug remark, every legal bombshell David had dropped in that one infuriating phone call. I could practically hear Chloe's jaw tighten over the line. When I finished, she let out a sharp breath. "Oh, he's an idiot," she muttered. "A complete idiot." I exhaled, pacing the room, my fingers gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. He thinks he's won. He thinks I'm just going to take this. My voice was steady now, cold, like steel cooling into place. Chloe let out a low chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "He clearly doesn't know who he's messing with. He can't sell the house without your signature, Amelia. You're on the title. That sale is invalid." That single sentence sent a thrill of satisfaction rushing through me. I knew it. I had felt it in my gut, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. So what do? We start by notifying the buyer that the transaction is illegal, Chloe said. Then we draft a formal legal letter outlining that David never had the authority to sell the property. If he's already taken money from them, he could be looking at fraud charges. Fraud. The word sent a spark through me, and for the first time since that awful phone call, I felt a small, vicious smile curl at the corner of my lips. Chloe continued, her tone sharp with purpose. "I need you to send me the latest deed, any emails or texts you have from David about the house, and do not respond to him. Let him stew." I nodded, already pulling out my laptop. "Done." I spent the next 2 hours going through every document, every email, every shred of proof I could find. I forwarded everything to Chloe, watching the pieces of David's carefully constructed lie start to unravel before my eyes. Every contract, every line of legal text, every mistake he made, it was all right there, waiting to be used against him. When I was done, I sat back, my fingers still buzzing with adrenaline. I wasn't just fighting for a house, I was fighting for me, for the woman David had spent years manipulating, gaslighting, underestimating. By the time Chloe called me back, her voice held a note of satisfaction. All right, the buyer is furious. They had no idea the sale was illegal. They're backing out. A sharp exhale of relief left my lips. That's perfect. But there's more, she said, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. The buyer has already threatened legal action against David if he doesn't return their deposit. He's in deep, Amelia. And the best part? She let the silence stretch for a moment. He doesn't know it yet. A slow, satisfying thrill ran through me. For so long, I had been the one blindsided, the one scrambling to catch up, but not anymore. Now, David was the one who didn't see it coming. That night, I slept for the first time in days. It wasn't a peaceful sleep. I dreamt of David's smug face twisting in shock, of legal papers being shoved in front of him, of Nicole realizing she had bet on the wrong man. But when I woke up, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control. The next morning, the first text came through. David, what the hell did you do? I stared at the message for a moment, then locked my phone without responding. He wasn't worth my time. Then the calls started, one after another, his name flashing on my screen, over and over again. Decline, decline. By noon, I got another message. David, you're making a huge mistake. You don't want to do this. I almost laughed. I don't want to do this. He had lied to me, cheated on me, tried to steal our home, and now he wanted to act like I was the one being unreasonable? I sent a single reply. Me. This is the last time you'll ever control what happens to me. Hope you and Nicole enjoy your fresh start. Silence. No reply. But I knew David and I knew he wasn't done. I didn't have to wait long. By the afternoon, he showed up at my apartment. The knock on my door sent a pulse of satisfaction through me. I took my time opening it. When I finally did, there he was standing in the hallway, his face red with anger, his jaw clenched so tightly I could practically hear his teeth grinding. You think you can just ruin my life? He spat. I tilted my head, crossing my arms over my chest. Oh, I'm ruining your life? That's interesting. I seem to remember a certain phone call where you very casually told me you were selling our house to start a new life with Nicole. His face twisted. You don't understand, Amelia. You're making this so much worse than it needs to be. I leaned against the doorframe, raising a brow. Oh, I understand just fine, David. You tried to erase me. You tried to throw me away. And now you're upset because I didn't roll over and let you do it. His fists clenched at his sides. You're being vindictive. That almost made me laugh. No, David, I'm just done. For a moment, I thought he might actually try to argue. But then his shoulders slumped slightly, his face contorted with something almost like desperation. Almost. Amelia, please, he said, lowering his voice, switching tactics. You don't have to do this. Let's just... No. He blinked. No, David. There's nothing left to say. You lost. His jaw tightened again, his nostrils flaring. He hated that. Hated not being in control. You're going to regret this, he finally said. I gave him the sweetest smile I could muster. Not as much as you will. And then, slowly, deliberately, I closed the door in his face. As I leaned against the wood, exhaling, I felt the last remnants of fear drain out of me. David thought this was over. He had no idea. Because I had just begun. So I'm left there in shock, completely blindsided. But what happens next? Will I let him take everything from me? or will I fight back? Comment 1 if you think I'll outsmart him, or comment 2 if you think his tricks will tear me apart. What do you think happens next? I sat in my apartment, my fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, but the warmth did nothing to soothe the adrenaline pumping through my veins. The events of the past 24 hours replayed in my mind, each scene sharper than the last. David had thought he could control the narrative, that he could blindside me, toss me aside, and walk away unscathed. But now, he was the one losing control, and he had no idea just how deep of a hole he had dug for himself. The first crack in his perfectly curated world had already begun to show. Chloe had contacted the buyer, and as expected, they were furious. No one likes finding out they've been tricked into a fraudulent deal, especially not on something as significant as a real estate transaction. The moment they realized the house sale was void, they pulled out no hesitation, no second chances. The contract was shredded, and with it, David's illusion of power crumbled just a little bit more. I could practically hear his frustration through the silence of my phone. He hadn't called again after I shut the door in his face, but I knew him. He wasn't taking this lying down. The silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation. David was plotting his next move. I had learned something about David over the years. When he felt in control, he was smug, arrogant, dismissive. But when he was truly backed into a corner, that's when he became dangerous. His temper, his ability to manipulate, his sheer desperation to hold on to whatever power he thought he had, it was a toxic combination. But this time, I was ready. Chloe called as I was pouring myself another cup of coffee, her voice sharp and businesslike. David's lawyer reached out. I let out a slow breath, already expecting it. And? He's trying to claim you had no right to interfere with the sale. A laugh bubbled up in my throat. That's rich. That's desperate, Chloe corrected. He's scrambling. But here's the thing, he still doesn't know the buyer already pulled out. He's still acting like he has a bargaining chip. I smirked, shaking my head. David had always been so sure of himself. So sure he was the smartest person in the room. He was so used to manipulating situations, he never even considered that he might be the one being played. What's the move? I asked. Let him think he's winning, Chloe said. For now, I grinned. Oh, I like that. Chloe chuckled. I thought you might. We'll let him twist himself into knots, thinking he still has an advantage. Meanwhile, I'll keep working on the fraud angle. If he took any money from the buyer as part of this sale, we're looking at serious legal consequences. The thought of David sitting in his high-rise office, convinced he was still in control, while in reality, he was standing on a crumbling foundation, it was almost too satisfying. I hung up with Chloe and sat back, staring out the window. The city buzzed with its usual chaos below, but for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. This wasn't just about a house, or money, or even revenge. This was about taking back my power. David had spent years making me feel like I was small, like I was lucky to have him, like I needed his approval, his validation. But that woman, she didn't exist anymore. I was done playing the role of the obedient wife who didn't ask questions. Now, I was the one calling the shots. And David? He was about to learn just how bad it felt to be on the other side of the table. By mid-afternoon, the first text came through. David, we need to talk. I stared at the screen, debating whether I should respond. Then another. David, you're being ridiculous. This doesn't have to be messy. Let's just be adults about this. I scoffed. Be adults about this? Was he serious? This was coming from the man who had cheated on me, lied to me, and tried to sell our house out from under me like I was nothing more than a tenant he was evicting. Now he wanted to act like he was the rational one? I put my phone down and ignored him. Let him sweat. An hour later, another message. David, if you don't respond, I'll have no choice but to take legal action. That one made me laugh. I took my time crafting my response before finally sending it. Me, legal action? For what? Trying to steal a house that was never yours to sell? I'd love to see you try. Delivered. I sat back and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang. David. This time, I picked up. His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the underlying frustration simmering beneath the surface. What the hell do you think you're doing? I smiled. I don't know, David. What do you think I'm doing? You're ruining everything, he hissed. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. I arched an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see me. I'm making this harder? You really expect me to just... What? Sit back and let you walk all over me? He exhaled sharply. This is childish. No, David, I said, my voice steady. This is justice. There was silence on the other end. Then, finally, he spoke. You're going to regret this. I almost laughed. No, David, you are. And with that, I hung up. I set my phone down, exhaling as a deep sense of satisfaction settled in my chest. David had spent years dictating how things went, but now he wasn't in charge anymore. And the best part? He knew it. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, watching the messages pile up one after another. David was unraveling. I could feel it through the screen, the desperation leaking through each carefully worded threat, each weak attempt to regain control. He was grasping at straws now, throwing every manipulation tactic he had ever used on me, hoping one of them would stick. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The one who used to second-guess herself, the one who would read his words and feel her stomach drop, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he was right. No, that version of me was gone. The woman sitting here now, she was done playing his games. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed as I scrolled through the latest text. David, you don't understand what you're doing. You're making a mistake you can't take back. A mistake. That was rich. Coming from the man who had cheated on me, lied to me, and tried to erase me from my own home, like I was nothing more than a loose end he had forgotten to tie up. Another message came in. David, this doesn't have to get ugly. We can settle this between us. No lawyers. Just talk to me. I almost laughed. No lawyers? That ship had sailed. The moment he had tried to sell a house that didn't belong to him. I didn't bother responding. Let him sweat. Let him wonder. Chloe had told me to keep my distance, to let him dig his own grave, and she was right. The legal wheels were already turning. The sale was void. The buyer was backing out. And David? He had no clue how bad things were about to get for him. I took a slow breath, standing up to pour myself a fresh cup of coffee when my phone rang. David, again. I let it ring 3 times before finally answering. What? His sigh was heavy, frustrated. We need to talk. We are talking, I said, taking a sip of coffee. His tone shifted, the anger barely restrained. You need to stop this. I set my mug down and leaned against the counter, letting the silence stretch between us before finally saying, Stop what, David? Stop protecting what's mine? Stop calling you out on your bullshit? He exhaled sharply. I didn't want to do it this way, Amelia. I really didn't. But if you keep pushing, you're going to force my hand. My grip tightened around the phone. Oh, is that a threat? I'm saying we should handle this like adults. Adults? I let out a humorless laugh. David, you sold our house without telling me. You told me you were leaving me over a phone call. You don't get to use the word adult like you have the moral high ground here. His voice dropped lower, colder. You're playing a dangerous game, Amelia. I rolled my eyes. And you're losing. Which is why you're calling me like a pathetic little boy who just realized he's not as smart as he thought he was. Silence. For a moment, I thought he had hung up. Then he spoke, his voice laced with barely concealed fury. You really think you're going to win this, don't you? I smiled. David, I already have. I ended the call before he could respond. The silence in my apartment was thick, the weight of the conversation settling around me. But instead of feeling fear, I felt something else. Power. For so long, David had controlled the narrative. He had been the one pulling the strings, making the decisions, deciding what was best. But now he was the one panicking. I knew he wouldn't stop. I knew he would push back, and I was ready for it. That night, Chloe called with an update. We just got word from the buyer's attorney. David's going to have to return the deposit. A slow grin spread across my face. Oh, I bet he's thrilled. I'm guessing you've already heard from him? I let out a breath. Oh yeah, he's spiraling. Chloe's voice turned sharp. Good, because we're not done. I want to hit him with the fraud charge. I bit my lip, my mind spinning. Would it hold? She hesitated, then said, if he's already spent any of that deposit money, he's in deep shit. My heart pounded. Find out. Chloe exhaled. You got it. The next morning, I was woken by pounding on my door. I groggily reached for my phone. 6:23 a.m. My stomach tightened. David. I pushed back the blankets, rolling out of bed, my heart hammering as I approached the door. Through the peephole, I saw him furious, disheveled, pacing. I took a deep breath before unlocking it and pulling it open just a crack. What the hell are you doing here? He shoved his hand through his hair, his eyes wild. You wouldn't answer my calls. I crossed my arms. That's usually a sign someone doesn't want to talk to you. He took a step closer, but I didn't move. Amelia, I'm serious. You need to back off. I raised a brow. Or what? His nostrils flared. You don't want to fight me. I tilted my head. Oh, but David, I think I do. His face twisted. You're making a mistake. You think you're so clever, but you have no idea what you're up against. I stared at him, feeling nothing but satisfaction. And you have no idea who you underestimated. For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face. Doubt. And that's when I knew. I had already won. The sun was barely rising when I sat at my kitchen table. The soft hum of the city outside blending with the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. My fingers curled around a steaming mug of coffee, but I barely tasted it. I was too focused, too wired. My body still vibrating from the confrontation with David the night before. He had shown up at my door. Furious, desperate, flinging threats and demands, like a man who was watching his entire world crumble before him. And the best part? He had no idea just how much worse things were about to get. I took a slow sip, my mind running over the events of the past few days, piecing together every misstep, every lie, every pathetic attempt David had made to regain control. He had underestimated me. Again, and now he was scrambling, grasping at anything, anyone, who could bail him out of the mess he had made. I had barely finished my coffee when my phone buzzed. Chloe, tell me you have good news, I said as I answered. Oh, I have phenomenal news, she replied, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. David's officially screwed. A rush of satisfaction surged through me. Go on. He's been using the deposit money from the house sale, she said, her tone laced with amusement. Not all of it, but enough. I nearly choked on my coffee. You mean he actually spent money that wasn't legally his? Oh yeah, Chloe confirmed. Which means we have him for fraud. I closed my eyes, letting the sheer weight of that realization sink in. David had done exactly what I had hoped he would. He had moved too fast, too recklessly, too arrogantly, never once stopping to consider that he might not actually get away with it. Do we have proof? I asked, already knowing the answer. Bank statements. The buyer's attorney sent them over this morning. David's been moving the money between accounts, probably trying to make it less obvious. But he's sloppy, and he was in a rush. Of course he was. David had always been the kind of man who thought he was untouchable. He operated under the delusion that no one could outmaneuver him, that he was always the smartest person in the room. But he had forgotten who he was dealing with. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, deliberate smile forming on my lips. So what's the next step? We file the claim, Chloe said without hesitation. We move fast before he has time to do anything stupid. I let out a sharp breath, my pulse thrumming with adrenaline. Let's do it! The moment I hung up, I stared out the window, watching the city wake up. The world outside moved on, indifferent to the fact that today was the day everything changed. Today was the day David realized he had no more moves left to make. The thought filled me with a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. And then, like clockwork, David called. I let it ring twice before answering. "What do you want?" His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic just beneath the surface. "We need to talk," I smirked. "Oh? About what?" "Cut the crap, Amelia," he snapped. "I know what you're doing." "Oh, good," I said lightly. "That'll save us some time." His breath came fast, uneven. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" "I don't think I am, David. I know I am." Silence. Then, a low, frustrated growl. "You need to back off." I laughed, genuinely amused. "Or what?" He hesitated, just for a second. But I caught it. The moment of doubt. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, his voice quieter this time, almost pleading. I tilted my head, even though he couldn't see me. "I seem to remember you saying that to me when you called to tell me you had sold our home without telling me. Oh, and again when you admitted to screwing Nicole." His breath hitched. But you know what, David?" One interrupted. "I don't regret a damn thing. And neither will you, Amelia." There was something different in his tone now. Something broken. It was the sound of a man who had finally realized he had lost. I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of it. Then I ended the call. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, utterly free. I sat in my apartment, the silence pressing in around me, the weight of everything that had happened settling on my shoulders. But instead of feeling crushed by it, I felt something else, something lighter, power, control. A strange sense of calm that had eluded me for years. David had spent so long convincing me that I was weak, that I needed him, that without him, I was nothing. But now, here I was, sitting in my home, the home he thought he had taken from me, watching as his world crumbled instead. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the last few messages he had sent. His desperation was growing. He was unraveling, his carefully constructed facade cracking under the pressure of his own mistakes. "David, you don't want to do this. David, you're making a huge mistake. David, call me. We need to fix this." I smirked. He had spent years making sure I felt powerless. But now, he was the one begging me for mercy. My phone buzzed in my hand, another message lighting up the screen. But this one wasn't from David. It was from Chloe. "Chloe, it's done. We filed the fraud claim." He's screwed. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening around the phone. I had known this moment was coming, had been waiting for it, but still seeing the words. Knowing that this was real, that David was about to face actual legal consequences for everything he had done, it sent a thrill through me that I couldn't quite describe. I typed back quickly. "Me, good. Let's see how he handles this." The answer came almost immediately. "Chloe, not well, I imagine. I'd pay good money to see his face when he finds out." I grinned, shaking my head. It wasn't long before I got exactly what I had been waiting for. David called. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the phone vibrate in my palm, knowing he was spiraling on the other end of the line. Then, finally, I picked up. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped. I leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "Oh, I don't know, David. Maybe held you accountable for once in your life?" His breathing was heavy, ragged. "You had no right, no right." I cut in, my voice sharp. "You mean like how you had no right to sell the house out from under me? How you had no right to lie to me for months? To cheat? To throw away our marriage like it was nothing?" His silence was answer enough. Then he tried a different tactic. "Amelia," he said, and for the first time there was something almost pleading in his voice. "You don't have to do this." I almost laughed. "Oh, but I do. You're going too far," he said. This is revenge, not justice. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. No, David. This isn't about revenge. This is about finally standing up for myself. This is about taking back what's mine. His voice dropped lower, quieter. You don't understand what's going to happen if you push this. A slow smile spread across my lips. Oh, I understand perfectly. And with that, I hung up. Because for the first time in years, I was done listening to David. I stood by the window of my apartment, the city humming beneath me, lights flickering like stars trapped between steel and concrete. The conversation with David still echoed in my head. Every word, every pause, every barely concealed trace of panic that had crept into his voice. He was unraveling, and he knew it. He was losing in a way he had never experienced before. And for the first time in our entire relationship, he had no power left over me. It was intoxicating. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the warmth spread through me, not from alcohol, but from the sheer satisfaction of watching him flail. He thought he could scare me, manipulate me into backing off. He thought his usual tactics, condescension, intimidation, feigned concern, would still work. But David was playing a game that he no longer understood. And I was steps ahead of him. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I didn't have to look to know who it was. The fourth call in the last 2 hours. I let it ring out, savoring the thought of him on the other end, pacing, furious, helpless. He wasn't used to silence. He was used to control, and I had stolen that from him. A few minutes later, another text came through. David, we need to fix this. Call me back. I smirked, setting my glass down. Fix this? Fix what, exactly? The fact that he had lied? The fact that he had tried to steal what was legally mine? The fact that he had spent money that didn't belong to him like it was just another disposable resource? Like I was just another disposable resource? I rolled my eyes and turned my attention back to my laptop, where Chloe's latest email sat open. Subject: Update David's in deeper than he realizes. I clicked it open, my heart thumping with anticipation. Amelia, I just spoke with the buyer's attorney. They're filing a formal complaint against David for breach of contract, and they're prepared to take legal action if he doesn't return the money ASAP. On our end, I've started drafting the fraud claim. He moved too fast and he was sloppy. He spent money that wasn't legally his, and he can't explain it away. We have the bank records. This is airtight. Call me when you get this. We need to discuss the next steps. I exhaled slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. This was real. It wasn't just a power struggle anymore. It wasn't just about revenge. This was law, and David was on the losing end of it. The best part? He still thought he had options. I picked up my phone and dialed Chloe. She answered immediately. Tell me you're as excited as I am. I laughed, running a hand through my hair. Oh, Chloe, I am beyond excited. He's running out of time, she said, her voice sharp and full of energy. He's already tried reaching out to the buyer, probably thinking he can smooth this over. But they're not playing along. They want their money back. And guess what? He doesn't have it. I grinned, biting my lip. So what happens now? We move forward, she said simply. File the claim. Lock this down before he can try anything stupid. The second he realizes he's got no way out, he's going to panic. And when men like David panic, they make mistakes. I knew that all too well. David wasn't the kind of man who handled pressure well. He handled control well. He thrived when he was the one making the rules, setting the terms, forcing others to dance to whatever twisted rhythm he dictated. But now, he was the one scrambling. I'll send everything over for you to review, Chloe said. But I wanted you to know first this is going to break him. A slow smile stretched across my lips. Good. After I hung up, I stood there for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the glass of the window. I looked different. Or maybe it wasn't that I looked different. It was that, for the first time in years, I recognized myself again. The woman staring back at me wasn't scared. She wasn't timid, waiting for someone else to decide her fate. She was powerful. She was dangerous. And David was about to learn just how much damage I could do when I finally decided to fight back. My phone rang again, cutting through the quiet, and this time I answered. David's voice came through immediately, sharp, angry. "I swear to God, Amelia, if you don't, I don't have time for this." I cut in smoothly. "You think you're so goddamn clever," he hissed, "but you don't know what you're doing." "Oh, but I do," I said, tilting my head. "I know exactly what I'm doing, David. And I know that you're running out of options." His breathing was heavy on the other end, and I could picture it perfectly, the frustration, the panic, the realization that he had lost control. "I want to settle," he said suddenly. "No lawyers, just us." I laughed. I actually laughed. "David, you don't get to make demands anymore." "I'm not making a demand. I'm trying to find a solution before this goes too far." "It's already too far." Silence. Then his voice dropped lower, quieter. "You don't want this fight, Amelia." I smirked. "David, I'm already winning it." Another pause. Then, a slow, measured exhale. "Fine. You want war? You got it." I rolled my eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, this was war the second you called me and told me you sold our house." And then I hung up. I set my phone down, feeling the energy thrumming through my veins, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment before the fall, the breath before the storm. And David? He had no idea just how hard the ground was going to hit when he finally crashed. I sat on my balcony, the city stretched out in front of me, a glass of red wine resting against my palm as I took slow, measured sips. The night air was crisp, the distant hum of traffic, a steady rhythm beneath the storm that had been brewing in my mind for weeks. David had finally lost. It wasn't just that the house sale had fallen apart. It wasn't just that the buyer had turned on him, or that he had dug his own grave with the fraudulent transaction. It wasn't even the fact that his money, his precious financial security, had bled out faster than he could cover it. No. It was the realization that he had lost control. And men like David don't handle that well. I had spent years watching him manipulate situations, twist reality to fit his narrative, make me feel small. But now, he was the one trapped, scrambling, drowning. And the worst part for him? I wasn't extending a hand to save him. I let my head tilt back against the chair, exhaling slowly. It had been a long road to this moment. A road paved with lies, betrayal, and gaslighting, all orchestrated by the man who had once promised to love me. And for so long, I had believed him. I had trusted that somewhere underneath the arrogance, the dismissiveness, the casual cruelty, there was a person who still cared. But David had never cared. Not about me. Not about our marriage. Not about anything other than himself. And now, he was paying the price for it. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, the glow of the screen illuminating David's name. Again. I smirked, letting it ring out, savoring the image of him on the other end, pacing in frustration. David had always hated silence. He had needed to be the loudest voice in the room, the one dictating how things went, bending people's emotions to his will. But now he was met with a wall, and he couldn't stand it. A few seconds later, another text. "David, the first swear to God, Amelia, answer the damn phone." I swirled the wine in my glass, debating. Then another. "David, you're making a mistake. You don't want this fight." A slow smile curled at the edge of my lips. Didn't I? I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. Then, without hesitation, I dialed Chloe. She picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Tell me you're not actually considering talking to him." I laughed. "Not a chance. But I figured you'd like an update on how desperate he's getting." She let out a low hum of amusement. "Oh, I already know. His lawyer called me. They want to settle." I sat up a little straighter. "Settle? Yep, he's officially out of options." I exhaled slowly, taking a sip of my wine. "What's their offer?" she snorted. "Honestly, pathetic. He wants to amicably resolve the fraud charge, if you agree to drop any further legal action. I rolled my eyes. Oh, how generous. Right? Like he's still in a position to negotiate. I let the silence stretch between us for a beat, thinking, what do you think? Chloe sighed. I think you've got him exactly where you want him. If we push this to trial, we could drag this out for months, make his life a living hell. But we already have everything we need to crush him financially. He knows that. That's why he's begging for an out. I bit my lip, considering, did I want to keep going? Did I want to watch him drown even further? Because I could. I could let this spiral even further down. I could bury him under so much legal debt he'd never recover, make sure he felt the consequences of everything he had done to me. Or I could walk away, knowing that I had already won. I set my glass down and exhaled. Tell him I'll settle on my terms. Chloe chuckled. Oh, this is going to be fun. We spent the next hour crafting the perfect response. If David wanted a deal, he was going to pay for it. The money he stole, he had to return it. The fraudulent documents, he had to admit to them in writing. And the best part, he had to walk away with absolutely nothing. No assets, no financial leverage, nothing. By the time I hung up, my heart was racing, the thrill of complete victory settling into my bones. David had started this thinking he would destroy me. Instead, he had destroyed himself. The next morning, I woke up to a string of texts. David, you can't be serious. David, you're actually going to do this to me. David, this is beyond cruel, Amelia. I hope you know that. I stared at the last message for a long moment, something sharp twisting in my chest. Cruel. I was cruel. Not him. Not the man who had lied, cheated, and manipulated his way through our entire marriage. Not the man who had tried to erase me, sell our home out from under me, humiliate me. No, I was the cruel one. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. David had spent years making me question myself, making me wonder if I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, too unreasonable. And even now, with his back against the wall, he was still trying to rewrite the story. But I wasn't falling for it. I opened my messages, typed 2 words, and hit send. Me, goodbye, David. Then I blocked his number. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I felt free. When Chloe called later that afternoon, I was already packing up the last of the things I wanted to keep from the apartment. Guess what? She said, her voice practically gleeful. I smiled, folding a sweater. What? He signed. I froze for a second, then let out a slow, satisfied breath. It was over. David had lost, completely, and I had won. As I looked around the apartment, our apartment, now only mine, I realized something. I had spent so much time fighting. So much time proving that I wasn't the weak, naive woman David had always assumed I was. But now I got to decide what came next. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was excited about the future, my future. And nothing, not David, not his lies, not his pathetic last attempts to manipulate me, was ever going to take that away from me again. I stood in the center of my apartment, surrounded by boxes that contained the remnants of a life I had outgrown, the weight of everything I had been through, every battle I had fought, every moment I had questioned my own strength. It all felt so distant now. As if I was standing on the other side of a war one had somehow survived, scarred but victorious. The morning had been quiet, too quiet, and for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel ominous. It didn't feel like the calm before another storm, before another manipulation, before another betrayal. It felt peaceful. I didn't need to brace myself for what was coming next, because for the first time in a long time, I was the one in control. I ran my fingers over the label on one of the boxes, the handwriting neat and deliberate, new beginning. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. Just then, my phone vibrated on the counter. Chloe. I picked up immediately. Tell me you have more good news. Oh, I do, she said, her voice practically buzzing with satisfaction. It's official. He's completely, utterly broke. I blinked, taken aback for just a second. Wait, already? Yep. His accounts are drained. The fraud case, the buyer's lawsuit, his legal fees, he doesn't have anything left. I exhaled, letting that sink in. David, the man who once lorded his financial control over me, the man who laughed when I asked about a joint savings account, the man who always made me feel like I was beneath him, like I needed him to survive, was now penniless. The irony was delicious. I let out a slow laugh. Wow, that happened faster than I thought. I told you, Chloe said smugly. Men like David don't plan for failure. He spent years playing the long con, thinking he'd always be on top. But when the walls started closing in, he panicked. He threw money at every problem, thinking he could buy his way out. But guess what? What? He ran out of money before he ran out of problems. I bit my lip, shaking my head in amusement. That's poetic. Chloe sighed dramatically. It really is. But I do have one more thing to tell you. I leaned against the counter, my curiosity piqued. Hit me. David's lawyer reached out to me again. And you're gonna love this. I rolled my eyes. Oh, let me guess he wants to renegotiate? Not exactly, Chloe said, her tone dripping with amusement. He wants to apologize. I actually choked on my coffee. Excuse me? Oh, I know, she said, laughing. His lawyer says David wants to make amends before everything is finalized. I nearly doubled over. David? Apologize? That's what they're calling it, she said. Personally, I think it's just another pathetic attempt to salvage whatever dignity he has left. But I figured you'd enjoy the visual. I did. Oh, I really did. The idea of David sitting in some overpriced office, probably pacing the floor, forced to acknowledge that he had lost to me, was priceless. And the best part? I didn't need his apology. I had already won. Let me guess, I said, smirking. He wants to meet in person? Bingo. I let out a slow breath, considering it for half a second, and then I smiled. Fine. I'll meet him. Chloe hesitated. Are you sure? You don't have to, you know. I know, I said, but I want to. And I did. Not because I wanted to hear whatever pathetic excuse David had prepared, not because I thought he was actually capable of remorse, but because I wanted to see the look in his eyes when he realized, once and for all, that he had no power left over me. The coffee shop was crowded, the low hum of conversation and clinking mugs filling the air. I sat at a small table near the window, stirring my tea absent-mindedly as I waited. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't anxious. If anything, I was calm. And then, right on cue, David walked in. I barely recognized him. His usual confident stride was gone, replaced with something more rigid, more hesitant. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress in his face, the dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked defeated. I didn't stand when he approached the table, didn't offer him a polite smile. I just watched as he hesitated for a moment, then finally sank into the chair across from me. For a long second, he didn't speak. I raised a brow. Well? His jaw tensed. You look good. I let out a soft, amused huff. Is that how you're starting this? His fingers curled into fists on the table. I don't know what you want me to say. I tilted my head. You said you wanted to apologize. His lips pressed together. I do. I waited. He inhaled sharply. I messed up. I made mistakes. I actually laughed. Mistakes? His eyes snapped up to meet mine, and for the first time in years, there was no anger there, no condescension, just defeat. I was selfish, he admitted. I should have stopped when I begged you to. I cut in. Thought about someone other than yourself? Realized that I wasn't some object you could just discard when you were done? He flinched. Amelia, you don't get to rewrite this, I said, my voice sharp. You don't get to sit here and act like this was some tragic misunderstanding. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew, and you did it anyway. his hands curled tighter on the table. I didn't think it would end like this. I stared at him for a long moment, and then, with absolute certainty, I said, "Neither did I." But it did. And it's over. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. So, what now? I picked up my tea, taking a slow sip before meeting his gaze. "Now?" I said, tilting my head. "Now, I walk away. And you? You live with what you did." He blinked, like he hadn't expected that. Like he had still, somehow, held onto the delusion that there was a chance, a way out, a way to spin this in his favor. But there wasn't. There never had been. I stood, grabbing my purse. "Goodbye, David." He looked up at me, and for the first time ever, he was speechless. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, stepping into the crisp afternoon air, lighter than I had felt in years. I had let him go. I had let all of it go. And as I stood there, breathing in the freedom I had fought so hard for, I realized something. I had spent so much time surviving him. But now I was finally living. The sound of my heels clicking against the pavement was rhythmic, almost meditative. As I walked away from the cafe, the weight of the encounter with David had already started to fade, dissolving like a wisp of smoke into the crisp afternoon air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For so long, he had been a storm hovering over my life, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. But now he was nothing. A chapter I had finally, completely closed. I let out a slow breath, feeling something settle deep inside me, peace. It wasn't the sharp rush of victory I had imagined it might be. It wasn't even the fiery satisfaction of revenge. It was something softer, steadier. It was freedom, real, undeniable freedom, the kind I hadn't felt in years, the kind I wasn't sure I had ever really known. I walked toward my car, the city buzzing around me, life moving forward at its usual pace. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't stuck in the past. I wasn't tangled in the wreckage of what had been, analyzing every mistake, every betrayal. I was here, in this moment, and it belonged entirely to me. When I got home, I kicked off my shoes and let out a breath, rolling my shoulders back, shaking off the last traces of tension. The apartment was quieter now, emptier after I had packed up the last few boxes. It was strange how space could feel lighter when certain things were gone. The memories that had once clung to the walls, memories of whispered arguments, forced smiles, and nights spent lying awake, wondering when it had all started to fall apart. They didn't haunt me anymore. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony, leaning against the railing as I watched the city stretch out before me. The sky was beginning to shift, warm streaks of gold and pink bleeding into the horizon, the sun sinking lower with each passing second. It felt symbolic in a way. One life ending, another beginning. A buzz from my phone pulled me back to the present. "Chloe." I smiled, swiping to answer. "Tell me you're celebrating," she said, skipping the greeting entirely. I laughed softly, defined celebrating. She huffed. "Amelia, you just annihilated your cheating, manipulative ex-husband, reclaimed your life, and walked away with everything. If you're not drinking champagne right now, I might have to come over there and force you to." I swirled my wine in my glass, amusement tugging at my lips. "I'm drinking wine on my balcony. Does that count?" "Barely," she teased. Then, after a beat, her voice softened. "How do you feel?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. How did I feel? Not angry, not bitter, not even exhausted. "I feel free," I said finally. "Like I can breathe again." Chloe let out a satisfied hum. "Good. You deserve that." I smiled, warmth spreading through me. I think for a while I convinced myself that I'd never really get here. That no matter what I did, David would always have some hold over me. That I'd always be tied to him in some way. But you're not. "No," I agreed. "I'm not." The realization was solid, unchangeable. There was no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. No more second guessing my choices. David was nothing but a ghost in my past now, and I was finally stepping into my future. "So what's next?" Chloe asked. I exhaled, leaning against the railing. "I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out." Over the next few weeks, something in me shifted. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, like watching the seasons change. I started rediscovering myself. I took on new projects at work, ones I had once shied away from, afraid of failing, of not being good enough. But now I wasn't afraid of anything. I spent time with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage, reconnecting, rebuilding. I let myself laugh freely, love deeply, live fully. I redecorated the apartment, stripping away the last remnants of a life that no longer belonged to me. I painted the walls colors that made me feel at peace, filled the space with things that were mine art. I loved books I had once abandoned, candles that smelled like warmth and comfort. I started traveling again, something I hadn't done in years. I visited places I had always talked about but never dared to explore. I stood on the edge of cliffs overlooking the ocean, let the wind whip through my hair, felt small in the best way possible. I let myself get lost in unfamiliar cities, meet new people, and realize just how much life I had left to live. I stopped waiting for closure, waiting for justice, waiting for the day I would wake up and suddenly feel whole again. Because the truth was, I had already healed. I had done it in the moments I chose myself over him, in the nights I refused to answer his calls, in the way I had fought not just against him, but for myself. I had won the battle the moment I stopped believing I needed to fight at all. One evening, as I was settling into my new life, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. A hesitant voice filtered through the line. "David." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "David." There was a beat of silence. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick up." I tilted my head. "Why are you calling?" "I don't know," he admitted. I guess I wanted to hear your voice." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "David, you don't get to do this. You don't get to call me months after everything and act like we're still connected." "I know," he said quickly. "I know that. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, letting the words hang in the air. He was too late. Far too late. And I didn't need his apology. I had already made peace with what happened. I didn't need validation. I didn't need closure from him, because I had given it to myself. So I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I forgive you, David," I said simply. His breath hitched. "You do?" "Yes," I said with certainty. "But that doesn't mean I want you in my life. It doesn't mean we can fix this. It just means I refuse to let you have any hold over me anymore." Silence. Then, softly, "I guess that's fair." I nodded to myself. "Goodbye, David." And then, for the final time, I hung up. I stood there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, before slowly setting it down. And then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I let him go completely. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Because my life was waiting for me. And this time, I was running toward it without looking back. In life, we often let fear, guilt, or manipulation keep us trapped in situations that no longer serve us. But I've learned that true freedom comes when we choose ourselves, when we stop waiting for justice, for apologies, for closure. No one should have the power to dictate our happiness, our worth, or our future. If someone tries to take everything from you, fight back. Not with anger, but with resilience. Walk away with your head high, knowing that peace isn't something given, it's something we claim for ourselves. And when we do, that's when we truly win. Well, here it is, the moment you've all been waiting for. What did I do to reclaim my life, my home, and my peace? Was David able to escape the consequences of his actions? Or did I finally put an end to his games? I walked away with everything. not just my house, but my dignity, my strength, and my future. This was the moment when I showed him he could never control me again. So, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Drop a comment and let me know, because trust me, there's always a way to fight back. Don't let anyone take your power ever.